Hey, everybody, and welcome into the Dad Verb Podcast. This is Ben, and this is where we chat about fatherhood from the lens of a dad. As you know, this is not the usual voice that does the intro to our podcast, and that's because our, what do we call him? Fearless leader, friend, other guy on the internet that we know, Andrew. Other Andrew is not in the office right now. He is off doing his actual job on the other side of the country.
Andrew. I'm the other Andrew. It's the actual Andrew who's missing.
Actual Andrew is not here. So I will be your gracious host this afternoon. And I'm really excited to bring in a guest, Pat Barber. Now, Pat, I've been following your content for a couple months now. I kind of stumbled across you, and Pat has two worlds that he works in. Do you mind if I call you Pat? That works, right?
You can totally call me Pat. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So Pat kind of works in two worlds. And if you've seen any of his stuff, if you're in the fatherhood community, he runs an Instagram handle with about 34,000 followers called the Father's Guild that gets into the deeper details of being a dad, really the highs, the lows, the challenges, and how he's taken this journey to try and build himself up into a better father, and has shared that out. And really, I think, inspired a lot of dads to challenge themselves to be better. On the other side of things, professionally, Pat is a coach of coaches, as it were. So Pat's in the world of CrossFit and fitness and helping other coaches be better. So it's been a really interesting follow to look at both what Pat does professionally and what he's doing personally, and how those two have kind of melded together to make this really incredible world of the Father's Guild, where he is sharing more information about what he calls tenacious, intentional parenting, which I think a lot of us as fathers and in this community could all use a lot more of. It's inspiring to watch. Really cool. Really excited to jump into this conversation. But before we get into the meat of the podcast, we've got to do our weekly sick check. Andrew, how's your household?
We're good. We're good.
Good?
The eczema
Everybody's
is
healthy?
under control. High hydrocortisone
Nice.
cream killed it. Dad's good. Mom's good. No one's sick.
All right.
The
nose
wind
whistling
has
is
not blown us
gone.
away. Yeah, the nose whistling from last week is gone. I do apologize. I don't know what that was about.
Hey, no worries at all. Pat, what about you? How's your family? Everybody healthy?
Family's good, man. Everyone's healthy. All four boys are healthy. Mom's healthy. And then I had a little neck tweak like 2 days ago, just totally random. And that's feeling good.
Mhm.
So everyone's good, man.
Isn't that the best part about starting to get older, is stuff just starts to hurt for no particular reason?
Dude, I was literally on a call. I was on a Zoom call and my neck started to go out and I was like, what's happening right now? Like, and I'm like standing right here, just being like, I'm so uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
like, it just got worse
Just
and
feel
worse.
like you're just fall over.
It's that George Costanza wallet, right? Just off kilter in the spine.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Okay,
from a
we
show
are
called
also-
Seinfeld that was in the 90s. You small children, like, go watch it. You'll
Yeah.
get it.
All you youngins out there, watch the reruns. Watch it on Hulu or something.
Right.
All right. Our family also surprisingly healthy. Got some teeth coming in, but nothing new. Everybody seems to be good, which is what are we back to? We dialed it back to week 1. I think we're in
that's
one.
2 in a row.
Are we 2 episodes now where everybody's healthy? Awesome.
Yeah, because I don't think
Usually-
anybody was sick last week.
No, I think we were good last week.
Okay.
It's
and 2 isn't here to
be
ruin
honest,
it. So
yeah, I know. So Andrew's got kids in school. I've got kids in daycare, and generally we're the ones to ruin it because our kids just come home with the plague constantly. There's always something going around.
Oh yeah.
But before we kind of jump into a couple things that I want to talk about, Pat, can you let us know, for anybody who doesn't follow you or has not experienced what the Father's Guild is all about, we want to know a little bit about what is fatherhood like for you? Like, what does family life look like for you? And then what brought you to start the Father's Guild and start this sort of exploring this world of this fatherhood community?
Sure. Fatherhood for me is I have 4 sons, an 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old. They're all amazing kids. I'm extremely lucky to have them. And I have an amazing wife who is born in South Africa, grew up in New Zealand. So she's got this kind of affected New Zealand, South Africa accent. She loves to travel.
Oh, wow.
She brought me on board with all that travel stuff. And we've been together since 2009. We live in the mountains of Santa Cruz, and we have like 5 acres here, and we homestead, like not officially with any like intention, but we have like 75 fruit trees. We've got a couple renters on the property. We've got chickens and dogs and ducks, and we homeschool all 4 of our boys. And other than that, I work online for a company that contracts with gyms and helps them run better gyms. And that's kind of me in a nutshell. Been doing this fatherhood thing for 11 years now, and love it. I think your second question was, what exactly is the Fathers Guild?
Yeah. Let's jump into that.
The Fathers Guild for me was, I have a really, I would say, tumultuous relationship with social media. I see it as doing far more bad than it does good in the world. And it just bothers me how really terrible people are extremely successful on it. And there's a certain instigatory, I don't even know if that's a word. There's a certain like this like nagging, like you have to be inflammatory to some degree in order to become popular on it.
Sensational.
Yeah, sensational.
Yeah.
And I've never really appreciated it. And it was just something I had because I was, part of a community where I was coming up, and I was like, cool, I'll start an Instagram account. And anytime I shared something that was meaningful to me, it never really went anywhere. It was like, like not many people saw it. And it was like, people were like, hey, that's not fitness. We don't care. And I was like, cool. So for me, I felt like I could either keep complaining about social media, or I could start an account that was meaningful to me and put out stuff that I cared about. And what I really care about is being a good father to my sons. I think it's the most important thing I can do. So for me, just as like a little side project, I kind of just created the Fathers Guild as like a forward-facing journal, something where I can like put my thoughts out and like, okay, put it here, and then this is what I'm trying. What has anybody else tried this, or how's it going for you, or whatever it is.
Right.
And it was just a tiny little account with like a couple 100 people following it, and I was like, cool, this is my forward-facing fun little journal. And then it hit the video that you probably found me from, which was the no yelling video. And then all of a sudden there was like 34,000 followers on it, and I was like, okay, well, I guess people care about fatherhood and and being intentional.
Or at least they wanted to hear you fail at not yelling at your kids. Like one of the two, right?
Yeah.
You know what's fascinating is like, I wonder how many people followed me who disagreed with what I did, like, because I had thousands and thousands of people disagree, but very few of them have stuck around. Like if any, like, I don't know why someone, like, I don't know, the negative people have like they were one and done. They like throw a negative comment, whatever on the video, and then I've never seen them again, which is fascinating to me because in the fitness space, I find like trolls that like cling on and they'll just be there forever, and you're like, thanks, cool, glad you're here. I don't know why you're here, but glad you're here. But for this, people have they're driving engagement.
They're driving engagement, positively or negatively. Like if their intention is to be negative and terrible, all they're doing is driving more eyes to what they don't agree with, which is a really interesting concept when you think of social media. Is like sensationalism works because all it does is drive disagreement and eyeballs to the thing. As long as there are more comments,
totally,
it's going to get more eyes. So they're almost like not achieving what they're trying to, bring you down with a negative comment, but really they're just driving more traffic to what you've created.
Well, it's been a known marketing adage. Yep, can't talk today. It's over. It's been a known marketing adage for years, right? No, there's no such thing as bad publicity. And social media has really, I think, underscored that in a very negative way, I guess.
For sure. Yeah. Well, what's interesting though is I don't think a lot of the people who comment in a negative way really care about suppressing something that they disagree with. I think they more just want to be heard and sound off. So it's like, they're not even thinking past I'm also helping this person. They're just being like,
that's not even consideration.
No, it's like, I'm just going to lash out, and regardless of the outcome of it, like, this is what I'm going to do. But it seems really like, from my limited experience of having excessive amounts of negativity thrown my way, it seems very surface level. But is what it is. It's the internet.
Well, and it seems like there's no depth, like you said, there's no depth to it, and I can't say that anyone I've ever met that is happy with themselves and happy with where their life is going out and trolling anybody else.
Totally.
So like anybody that's satisfied with what they're doing, like generally doesn't have time or the desire to go out and just be mad at the world and you leave negative comments on other people's stuff, especially things that I think, at least in my personal opinion, I think are positive on our good representation of like where we want to go as dads and as people and the type of legacy we want to leave. Even if you don't agree with how it's being done, I think it's interesting that how can you look at another father and say, you know, I might not agree with all the ways you're doing it, but the end goal is be a better dad. And like, what is there to say that's negative about that? I don't think there's anything bad you can say about that other than we might be getting there a different way.
Yeah. Well, but I think what's some people haven't even defined what a better dad means. So like, I think for some people, I fundamentally disagree with what being a better dad means. You know, like for them, it might mean like, I need to be the best friend to my kids, or like, I need my kids to never feel any sort of pain. And I'm like, that's, in my mind, that is not being a good father. That is not like, that is sheltering a child. And so like, I think where the disagreements would happen would be around a definition of what it means to be great or what it means to pursue fatherhood in a meaningful way. And then that's, I think that's where people get really vitriol, is like they like jump in there and throw these words out and these statements that you're like, oh goodness, wow. That's heavy. I'm sorry you feel that way.
You really got upset there.
Well, I think it's one of those, we all have philosophical differences, right, on what being a good dad means for each of us. And society has not necessarily defined what a good dad is. I think we can all kind of agree on like a series of things that make up a bad dad, right? But,
for sure.
But we don't agree at all on, I mean, even within our moderator group, right? It's on Discord, it's such a diverse community that it actually surprises me we don't actually get in more like weird moderation debates, because we have someone who's very heavily Christian. We have someone who is very heavily atheist. We have someone who's very passionate about stoicism, right? I mean, Ben's down the stoic dad trail further than
way down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, and like we don't disagree.
Aurelius's fatherhood history, though. Aurelius.
No, it's terrible. I mean, he's terrible. He's a terrible father. Like, a bunch of his kids died. Like, he just was not. Not great.
Like Nero Part 2, and you're like, okay,
it was awful. And he failed terribly at many things.
But we all agree we need to be better dads, right? And I think that's the piece. Is there's a underlying philosophical piece we all agree on.
Totally.
And I think what you're getting at is it's very hard for the superficial level internet troll people, or just the 30-second commenters, to affect that philosophy in a community that says, look, we're going to all do it differently and we're willing to accept that, but we're going to do it better. Yeah. And you can't get at that with your truck's blue, so you're a dummy, right? That doesn't work.
No, not at all. But what I think is interesting is, like, it might be actually more worth it to examine what outcome we're looking for and see if we want the same outcome, because I think that'd be easier to agree upon than the route to get there. Because I think it'd be easier to examine something like, you know, what sort of skills do I want my kid to have, both tangible skills as well as emotional skills, what sort of, you know, levels of intelligence and all these other things that, like, if we looked at them and stepped back and we're like, what is a human being who's going to be successful in this world? And even what does that mean success-wise? Maybe I should say, what does a human being who can navigate the world successfully need in order to thrive? Right. And then we can go, okay, well, we're all trying to achieve this same outcome. And I think there'd be a higher likelihood that people would agree there.
Right.
And then we could go, okay, well, now what's the mechanism for us to get there? And then we go, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? What's going on with that?
Yeah.
Like,
how are we failing?
Yeah.
Right. How are you failing?
I mean,
How
it's
you
not
failing?
like any father I know ever set out to have a crack kid, right? Like, my goal's for my 18-year-old to be addicted to meth and live in the trunk for like.
No.
I've never heard
Yeah.
a father say that.
No
right?
one's
Like,
ever started that way.
right. And
Well,
so I think you're right. There's a dream that we're all targeting, and we make mistakes along the way. And
Right.
it's how can we learn from one another to avoid those mistakes?
And I think a lot of us fail to examine what the outcomes are of the choices that we're making. We just make them because that's what happens. It's either the easiest route or it was done to us. So we go, okay, this must make me again, And so I think that where I would, with the tagline you said earlier with the tenacious intentional parenting, I think there's a requirement in my mind to examine why we're doing what we're doing and if it's the best outcome to achieve the result we're looking for. And that's
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I think the crux of most of our conversations are. Like, I think in the last episode or an episode previous, like Andrew and I realized like we're a little bit not on opposite sides, but like a little bit opposite on how we approach certain situations.
Right.
But at the end of the day, where we agree is we want to raise resilient children, right? That can handle the world, that can adapt, that can overcome whatever situation they're in. Now, how we get there might be different, and that's perfectly okay. We can still be friends at the end of the day and have differing opinions on things. And so I think to your point, when you're talking through this idea of like, well, it happened to me and I'm okay, so it must be okay to do to my kids, right? Like there's so many people that look at that as the sort of easy default path of, this is the thing that happened to me. And I think what all of us have experienced or realizing as dads is, one, we want to do it better. That's just sort of the fact, is we think there might be a better way to do it. Secondarily, we're realizing that there are things that trigger us, make us upset, lead us to express our emotions in a certain way, right? Like I like you, I think I have a challenge with not reacting with frustration or anger. So my kids are 3 and 1. So my daughter, she's 1. She's really easy to deal with. She's basically still an infant. But my son is like getting to the point, he's almost 4. Super smart, very opinionated, very has a lot of emotional depth, but he feels things very deeply. And so that for me personally is a big challenge, because when he feels stuff and he melts down and it becomes, especially in a stressful situation, I think is really hard for me to manage. And so now I've had to look at myself and go, why is that triggering for me? Like, why does this lead me to feeling angry or frustrated rather than like empathetic and more emotionally open to that? And so it sounds like, from what I've gathered of looking at your content, when you did this no yell challenge in January, it seems like you were also examining well, I'm doing this thing, I'm yelling, or I'm getting frustrated, this is kind of bothering me to the point where I am losing control of myself. What can I do to change it? And why do I need to change it? And what's the right pathway forward? And so I want to jump into that a little bit and kind of understand what prompted that and kind of what your experience was through that whole challenge.
Can I get a clarifying question in there?
Yeah.
Because Andrew has multiple levels of yelling in his life, right? There's like drill sergeant, the world stops, no one's going to like not hear me. And then there's like, I raised my voice and 90% of the world thinks that's yelling, but it is not this, right? Like, where did you define yelling? Like, at what point were you yelling for this challenge?
Yeah. So to me, any yelling was yelling. So a raised voice, like with any sort of aggression behind it, that was yelling.
Okay.
And what's fascinating, Andrew, have you ever filmed yourself raised
myself?
voice? Yeah. Have you ever raised voice, film yourself, like caught it on camera where you thought you were sounding a certain way? I doubt it. So it's fascinating, because what you think you sound like is drastically different. In my personal experience, and it's just like, even just little things like inside, I know I'm not mad, like a lot of these times, but I'll hear how it comes out third party. Like I'll happen to be recording something else. A situation will go down, and then I'll be re-editing it, and I'll just be like, whoa, like that was way more intense than, because in the moment I wasn't feeling anything crazy.
Who was that monster? Yeah,
totally. But so it was, and my wife had expressed that, like, you know, when you raise your voice, even though it's not your true yell, because there's a very scary yell that I can go to, it's many steps down from that. It's just like the tone is so aggressive, like that. It's even if you're trying to say something with, you know, positive intent, it's harsh. And I'm not saying that you don't need that, you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying, for me, what I wanted to do and what I was sounding like was not what I was intentionally sounding like. And so I was like, son of a gun. So that was one thing I had to examine. The other thing for me on this challenge was more, could I navigate these situations that required a raised voice? Like if they couldn't hear me, if they're like, Dad, what? Or if they're like across the house, I'm like, hey, you know, like, but I wanted it to not be, if I'm close to them and I'm raising my voice.
Right.
There was clearly me trying to be heard in a way that was not just a distance thing. Oh, you can't hear me. And there's definitely varying layers to that. But for this challenge, it was like none. Like if I respond with a raised voice, I was kind of done. Well, I was not done. I had to pay $5. So the whole challenge.
Who was the arbiter of this? Like, I didn't watch the video. I just talked about it a couple times, and I was not. I was like, okay, this sounds interesting.
Yeah, it was me. So like what had happened was my wife had come to me and she had said that like all three of the boys independently in conversations, because she puts them to bed a lot of the times and she'll talk to them and they like just talk. But like she independently of each other, all three boys had like talked to her about being scared when I yell, because I'm a pretty relaxed person. So when I actually yell, it's like, it's really scary. And I understand how it could be very frightening. Like I've got a coaching voice, and then it goes really loud and there's a lot of intensity behind it. So if I ever get there, I've never gone there and been like stoked that I did that. You know, I've never reflected on it and been like, that was the right call. You know, like it was never the case. You know, even like in the moment I could be like, this is justified. But then like the hurt it causes far outweighed the change that I had in the moment. So I've never been stoked on that one, but it existed as a place I could go if I needed to. But there's another yell below that that's just like, I'm frustrated with the situation. And I'm like, dude, like, what the hell? Like, why would you do that? You know, like, where it's like, you spilled water in bed, and I told you not to bring a cup into bed. Like, because you're going to spill it. And you said you wouldn't, and you did, you know? So, like, my response would be to go to there. So they had each independently come to my wife and kind of told her at different times, not like came to her and said that, but in conversation it had come out. So I was filming something else for my other job, and I wondered what would happen if I interviewed each one and asked like, hey, my least favorite part about my dad is, what would they say? And my kids feel pretty darn safe around me to say whatever. Like if there's no, I don't present actual danger to them.
There's no fear of like reprisal or repercussions. Like they're still open to having the conversation.
Like I like I'll definitely make fun of them or mock them or like or I'll, you know, if it's truly bad, like if they're hurting their brothers, but they could never hurt me, like my feelings. They could say whatever they want to me, like that's okay to some degree, unless they're being like truly disrespectful. But my kids aren't disrespectful, so I've never really run into that. But I brought them in one by one and interviewed them, and just like the other ones were out of the room. They didn't know what the other one was talking about. And they each finished the sentence of like, what's my least favorite thing about my dad? It's like yelling at me, screaming at me when you yell. Like those are like the three things. And I was like, okay, well, cool. And I did a longer interview, but posted just like a cut down little minute and 30-second clip, because that's how Instagram works. Right. Me being like, well, I'm going to try to see if I just remove yelling, can I still get the effect that I'm looking for of like having meaningful change in the kid, still being respected, you know, still just being their father who's like I'm going to authoritative figure in their lives. I need to set examples and roles, and like I need to show them how to deal with stressful situations. Can I do that without yelling? And I didn't know. And I know that if you challenge me, I do well. Like if you tell me, hey, you should do this, I'll be like, hey, go F yourself. But if you challenge me, like, I don't think you can.
Hey, you
or
can't
like,
do this.
Or you can't do this.
You're not able to.
I'm like, well, let's go do this.
Well, let's see.
Yeah. So I challenge myself to do 1 month, no yelling. And if I yell, I pay the kid $5 right in the moment. And all these people were like, whoa, you're incentivizing him to get you to yell. I'm like, that's not how parenthood works. You know, if the first time they try to do that, I say that's not how this challenge works. And they go, oh, okay, my bad. And then they leave, you know, like,
right.
My kids are far more incentivized by me not yelling than they are getting $5. So
just FYI, around 8th grade, they learn how that dynamic works, and it goes the other way. Because that was my punishment. So in around 8th grade, it was, if you don't do well in school, you can't go to the movies. But my parents would never not buy us books to read. And so, like, I think my 8th grade year, I read like 25, 26 novels. And so it was actually the opposite. Like, I was incentivized to not do my homework and read these novels I really liked because I was encouraged to read.
You're going to get the books no matter what.
Yeah, I logicked through I don't have to do French. Like, who cares if I get a D in French? I'm going to finish this novel series I'm after, right? And so, like, there's a moment where your kid will out-logic you on that one, and I want the money. You're going to yell so I can buy a new bathing suit. I can buy another video, right? Like,
interesting. Yeah, I don't think that necessarily applies here, but I could see where you could play that
get older,
as an 8th grader.
Right? Yeah.
No, I was the most conniving kid in the world, but I think there's boundaries that I've set for my children where, like, if they were to ever like try to logic their way into like playing me, they would just lose all privilege. And not like out of emotion. It would just be like, I don't bend and break, and I don't play the game of like, hey, you're going to get me to do something. It's like, I don't care how old you are. Until you're 18, like, that's just not going to happen. And that being said, I hear what you're saying. My kids, like, so far are not like that. And it could happen.
I think you're setting the idea of boundaries and natural consequences, though.
Yes. Right.
And so it's the idea that, like, yeah, this, you know, for this challenge, I'm trying to be better. That's sort of the core of it, of how do I get to a place where I am more comfortable with how I lead the family and still maintain my role as a father.
Right.
But at the end of the day, too, you're still doing that while holding appropriate boundaries and saying, you know, these are the things that are acceptable, these are the things that are not, but we can get there without, you know, me raising my voice. Because when you were talking about like the spilling the cup of water in the bed, or I told you not to do that, or I told you this would happen, that resonates a lot with me, because I feel like those, when I'm talking with my son, like that could be a conversation I'm having with, you know, my 3-year-old. Totally. And it's, I wonder how much of that for you came from a place of not anger, but like frustration, or this idea that, like, if you had just listened to me the first time, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Because I know that's where I usually end up is, you know, if you had done it the way I asked you to, or had done it the way I knew it was going to work out, then we wouldn't have ended up in this situation where, like, now you're upset and your bed is wet because you spilled your cup of milk in there that I asked you not to take in there, or that I asked you to put a lid on and said, hey, we should put a lid on this so you don't spill this in your bed. And now I have to go change the sheets at 10 o'clock at night because, you know, you spilled your milk in your bed.
Right.
And so I've never recorded myself saying things like that. But as you were saying it, I was thinking through this idea, and I was like, man, that is probably exactly what I sound like, especially as, you know, a 230-pound man looking at a 30-pound 3-year-old. Like, that's a very different, like, but it's a very different, like, power dynamic, right? Like, it's your dad looking at you and sort of towering over you and saying, you know, I told you shouldn't have done this, is probably a very different interaction from his point of view than it is from mine.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Totally.
Well, and
It's completely a different dynamic, and I think that that for me the whole thing was just trying to be able to take a beat in between, you know, situation and response, and I didn't have a beat. I don't think many of us have a beat. Like if you do, you're awesome. Like good for you. If you're going to yelling because you're like, I think this is the best choice because you've thought of all the choices and you go, this is the one I'm going for, then awesome. Like for me, I just didn't have.
At least you thought about it.
Yeah, like, and for me, like I didn't have any space. There was no like something happens, I'm gonna respond, and then there's this little thing in the middle. It was just like something happens, immediate response, and I needed space to choose something different.
I've started using a lot of the, like, there will be a verbal instruction multiple times, and then it'll be, look at me, make eye contact, so that I know that you heard the verbal instruction. And then when it's ignored, we go to the, okay, I've given you the opportunity to hear me and understand the instructions, and you still ignored me.
We've had the conversation.
It's going up a level now.
Yeah.
Or I will come pick you up and we will do the thing. But that actually works.
Yeah.
For me, it's worked really well, right? Because I it's funny, there's a stupid country song and I forget what it is, but the tagline is let them be little, right? Let them sleep in the middle. Like it's a great song, but I have to keep telling myself that. Like, I have a 2-year-old. Let her be a 2-year-old. Let her fail. Let her fall off of her trike. Even though I know it's going to hurt and she's going to cry, I have to let her learn that because she can't learn it from my experience. Because I think if we were all turn around and say, what was the thing we hated worst about our dad? With 20 years experience, we're going to say things like, oh, I didn't like it when he worked late, or I didn't, right? But in the moment, it's going to be things, if you actually took your childhood presence, right? I didn't like it when he spanked me. I didn't like it when he, yelled really loud. I didn't like it when he sent me to bed with no food, right? It wasn't the big picture psychological trauma that took 10 years to implement, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Or
sure. I think they all kind of like mold into each other though.
Right.
From
hindsight though.
From hindsight, absolutely. Something I just got that kind of reminded me of that with the falling on your trike that someone was talking to me about recently is like this kind of analogy of, it's not even an analogy. It's just like when you think about how physically how short it is to fall as a kid, like how the distance,
right,
when you fall as a child,
right,
is something that is much different than falling as an adult. When you fall as an adult, it hurts a lot more. Now, when you take
it's
that
measured in feet, not inches,
for sure. So, but when you take that and extrapolate it to emotional failure and like falling and failing and basically letting a child fall and make mistakes and do stuff as a child is a much better place to learn than as an adult. So if you protect your child up until they're an adult, that distance they have to fall both emotionally and financially and physiologically is much greater. So like one of the greatest things we can do is get out of their way and let them make their mistakes and have the natural outcome of what's going on, both physically, like, hey, you're riding your trike, it's gonna hurt if you don't like look where you're going, and then they a natural consequence there, but also like real consequences of like, okay, well, you're gonna bring that milk to bed, and if you do, and if you knock it over, we're not gonna get that again, and we're not gonna be able to have milk in bed ever again. And they knock it over, and you're like, well, we can no longer have milk in bed. Like that's just but without that consequence of like, well, we just can't do it anymore. And it's not, I'm not mad at you. Like yes, I have to clean your bed, but that's my role as the father. And I get that. I'm not that frustrated at it. It's not going to be that big of an issue, but unfortunately now we have to continue to enforce that you can't have milk in bed. And that's a very, that distance to fall is much different than, all right, I'm going to have to pull the pin on paying your rent and they're 30 and all of a sudden they're homeless. It's like, that's a much different distance to fall. I don't know. It's something that goes in,
that weighs into what we were talking about last week. I mean, almost 110%. Like we should edit that short out and shove it into the other video somewhere. Because it fits with exactly the piece that we were discussing last week, which was right in that same vein, right? It feels like there's a certain point where we're coddling our kids too much and creating a problem. And there was a article by was it the Daily Mail author that wrote it?
Yeah, it was a Daily Mail article that we were discussing last week about how basically they were saying like touchy-feely parenting is like ruining children. And it was an interesting article. It was a lot of, kind of opinion and I think some substandard data, but the central
they had
the
research.
central
it wasn't
point
necessarily good and reliable research.
Yeah, they had opinions of like single physicians and like psychologists. So and anyways, the discussion I think was good though, and it was this idea that like coddling your kids basically does not prepare them for the world. Like we have created it was sort of going back, which, as a millennial, I think this is the challenge, right? Is now we're seeing people come after Gen Z, just like they did with sort of our generation of like, they're soft and they don't know what they're doing and everybody gets an award and they've been ruined and they're hard to work with and this and that. And now we're seeing that like really get directed towards Gen Z as they're really coming into their own and into the workforce and into parenthood and all of this, is that they're basically being made out to be like difficult to work with and basically unable to handle the realities of the world.
Right.
And so it's a really interesting discussion of like, well, yeah, I mean, these kids don't raise themselves. Like they get this way by, as you said, sort of being coddled, being sheltered for so long, not having any real responsibility. And I think that gets back to this idea of like the no yell challenge of, I don't need to do anything in most cases, unless my son is in like actual danger.
For sure.
I don't need to do much. I can kind of let these consequences play out, even if I see there's going to be an issue, a problem. And so one of the things I've really tried to focus on is allowing him to make those mistakes and not preemptively say, if you do this, then this is going to happen. It's more asking the question of, well, do you think that's going to work? Like, you're making this choice. Do you think that's going to work out? Here's what I think, but is that going to work out for you? Let me know what happens. And as long as he's not, picking up a butcher knife and trying to cut a steak or something, like he's probably going to be okay. He might be upset or wet or whatever, but he'll survive. And so that gives me also, as you said, that space to look at it. And instead of me having said something and then him not listening, it becoming this weird little power struggle of like, I know this is going to go wrong and why won't you listen to me? It becomes okay, try it. It's fine. Try it. You'll be okay. Let's see what happens. And maybe it works out and it's perfectly fine. And I was wrong and that's great. Maybe it doesn't work out and he was wrong and he's learned something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'd agree with you there. I think there's a big difference between coddling a child and loving them. And I think that some people take this idea of, hey, we don't want to coddle kids. And it's like, you don't express love to them. You don't express like compassion for them. And then some people take the idea of expressing love and mean you need to protect them. And I'm like, God, there's a middle ground. There's a huge middle ground. Like we don't need to be on either ends of the extreme.
They're
like
not
you
even
can
the same thing.
You can deeply love your child and express that to them and have emotion around them and, hug them and kiss them, but not coddle them, coddling is, I don't see much value in it. And I might agree with that article in some ways, but I think a lot of the rhetoric, and well, especially you said it was the Daily Mail, like from that demographic of a place is going to be around like, we wussifying our next generation. And it's too extreme on that side. Cause there's a lot we can take from like, the 50s, they talk about this golden age of like kids coming up under, they had to learn the thing and contribute to the household. It's like, they were deeply traumatized individuals psychologically and emotionally because they had repressed love and didn't even know what they were worth, and then we get in the flip side of other things where
they raised Gen X. So
right. Yeah. And then you get into like our millennials and our what do we have now? What's Gen Z? Who have been like to some degree coddled, like they've been shown a lot more care to some degree, but like unless you were allowed to make mistakes, like a lot of people are walking through this world deeply anxious. Like we're in the most anxious and depressed period of time. And I think that's where it plays out, is you see people just walking around like feeling unsafe because they didn't get to fall as a kid and realize, hey, I'm going to be okay. Yeah. Like even if I shatter my forearm, I'm going to be okay. I'm also going to like get to try this little friendship group out. It's not going to work out. My mom's not going to come in and save me. I'm just going to be like, you know what? I'm going to find some new friends over here. You know, like it's going to be okay. Right. I don't know. There's a lot that goes into it. I think, again, social media is not great.
Yeah.
It's like cell phones and like, I mean, the whole thing designed to keep your attention and not let you experience the world. Shucks, there's a lot there.
You don't know what you're capable of.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think we miss so much, and I think we miss with boys. I think we also really miss it raising girls. I think in this generation of boys, we will be better off allowing them to make sort of calculated mistakes, allowing them to fall, allowing them to experience the things that they're experience and understand the things they're truly capable of. I think all our kids are going to be better off by letting them fall, letting them make mistakes, letting them understand who they are, because it builds resiliency and character. And that's what we're missing in a lot of cases. Is I'm walking around with this anxiety because I don't know the outcome, and not knowing the outcome, not having that predictability of someone's going to tell me it's going to be okay and they're going to be able to fix it if something goes wrong, means you never make a decision and never make a choice or a direction because it might be wrong.
Right.
And some of that I think probably also comes from the way we parent our kids. Like that's one thing that I really struggle with, is not like hovering over my kids saying like, oh, no, you should like try doing it this way and try doing it this way. And you end up not letting them make choices, which then again makes them not understand what they're capable of doing.
Totally. Right. I mean, that personal autonomy, if like you look at most of the parenting books will talk about autonomy being like a really important thing. Even parenting books from deeply different methodologies, like if you can give that freedom to make your own choices within reason, of course, like, I don't know, there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, your kids are still relatively young, the 3 and the 1. And what I find personally very fascinating is like much of what I try to teach my kids is minimally effective. At best. But what I do and how I interact with the world is almost to a T what they are, both my flaws and my strengths. So like I think it serves us almost better to spend less time focusing on what our kids are doing and trying to teach them stuff than it does to like spend time on ourselves going, okay, how do I navigate the world? Like, what am I really effective at? Like, what am I not effective at? How can I be better at this? Because that gives them the example of someone doing it effectively. And it's like, okay, that's what they're going to model. What's my relationship like with my wife? How do I exercise? What's my relationship with exercise? How do I eat? What's my relationship with food? Like all of these things, they're watching every little piece, regardless of whether you want them to or not. And they're going to model that regardless of whether they want to or not. Your habits become their habits to some degree because they're in your house for 18 years. So it's like, I think we stand a lot to gain by examining our own choices and realizing that they impact our own choices about ourselves, that they deeply impact the children, which is a heavy weight to bear. But unfortunately, that's parenthood.
That's the job.
Well, the thing you just struck up for me is that old adage that every girl marries her father and every boy marries their mother, right?
Yeah.
And to some extent, that's very true. If you look at your extended family or married, like if you start to look at groups en masse, you marry similar people to your parents. But then my brain immediately went to, okay, so if I have to work on healthy behaviors, when I make a mistake in front of my kid, I also have to make sure I correct that mistake in front of my kid, which is a lot harder than making the mistake, right?
Yeah.
Blowing up at the guy in the grocery store for hitting your car with the grocery cart is a lot easier than finding him and apologizing later, right? When you're all calm and the parents buffed it out, and making sure you do that in front of your kid is even one step harder, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's
admitting you made that mistake and then rectifying it. Like, imagine that, like being a better human being in front of your kids is one of the most difficult things in the world. Because before you had kids, you would just let it go and go like, you know what? Bygones be bygones. It's over. It's done with. And you're like, no, this little person in the backseat is watching every move, and they're going to learn from that. They're a little tiny mirror and reflection of everything that you are.
Yeah. And it takes all of them until their 30s before they realize that their parents were fools and taught them a bunch of bad habits too, right? So it's just a perpetual cycle.
Well, but I think the beauty of it is like that's the human condition, is we get to examine, right? There's a lot inherent, but like until we're looking later in life, I think, like you said, it's you have to hit 30 before you even start to examine in a meaningful way. I think we get to modify some of the next generation by being like, okay, well, I'm not going to do these things, or I am going to do these things, or like whatever it was. Like we have these little opportunities to like move forward as a species. And I think it's when we don't examine that, then we just like, it's kind of a waste of a life. But that's just my own personal opinion.
No, well, and I think, I mean, there's a true piece of odd privilege here in the fact that we all have the ability to do that, to even make those examinations. There's a large portion of the world who doesn't even have the brain power because they're going, how do I feed my kid their next meal? How do I keep them from wandering into the minefield, war zone, right? Whatever situation is in their actual backyard. And so I don't know. My brain just went like, oh, great. I'm glad we get to be these nice, enlightened, pompous, guys on the internet going, I want to have a better life for my kid, when there are dads out there who are truly just like, how do I feed my kid their next meal?
It's 100%.
I could care less if I yell at them. How do I feed them again? Right.
Totally. Yeah. That's 100% a privilege. Like to be able to think about any of this, to be able to worry about any of this is a huge privilege. Right. Like there's I recognize that daily. But there's plenty of people who have that privilege who've chosen to ignore it and or have chosen to go work more. And you're like, cool. Yeah. Like you've been given the privilege to examine the life that you have, and you're not doing that. Like,
right. You're not even bothering to try and improve.
The man who chooses not to read is just as worse than the man who can't read. I think is like it's the man who chooses not to read is just as bad as the man who can't read. So it's I don't remember where that's from, but I heard that the other day, and it really stuck with me. Of just like the choices that we make from the position of privilege that we have. It's like by choosing not to make those decisions to be better while having all the tools to do so is a to our own detriment.
For sure.
But and that's why I think that is probably,
we need to be examples of that.
Good.
I just think that we need to be examples of that, because or whoever is like conscious enough to make that happen, because I don't think there's always the greatest examples to turn to. Like for men and fathers in this world, like there's not like the examples aren't great, a lot of them. So like if we so someone might.
That's why I want to have these conversations.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I appreciate coming on and having conversations.
Well, and that's, I mean, I hope, I mean, one of the things we don't talk about it much, Ben, but there is this weird hope that like some teenager finds this and actually looks at the advice we're giving out as dads as fatherly advice that they can take in as and make useful, right? Because there is a gap of fathers in certain demographics for children in the world, right? In this country, they don't have good examples, right? I mean, almost every time you get a great athlete who's like, this is somebody you should look up to, the very next day they're in jail for something, and it was like, oh, I guess that didn't work. Or right, like,
turns out that may not be the best thing,
right? Exactly. And so I think there's to show, for lack of a better term, everyone out there that there are people who are just trying to do it better, whether it's a privilege or not. is,
and that we don't have it figured out and we're all learning.
Right.
I think that's the most important thing is like your parents had no idea what they were doing. They were trying to figure it out, and we're just the next step in that chain.
Yeah. We don't.
But I think that's a great place for us to end our conversation. I think this has been awesome, Pat. Thank you for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. It's been a really enlightening chat. I think you got some really good viewpoints on things. It's been really, really fun to talk with you. Hopefully we'll be able to have you on again here in the next few episodes. But we always like to end our episode with either a YouTube comment or a Discord comment from our community. I think this one is coming from YouTube this week at KRN Fub Boyster. Real hard to read username, but they wrote something super nice on one of our last videos. Said, "This is exactly what I've been looking for and needed to hear. Y'all have no idea. Really appreciate the work y'all put into this. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that." And this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing, right? I think we're all dads that are just trying to figure it out and sharing what we know, what we're experiencing, what we don't know. With our community is exactly how we all learn and grow and get better together. Just to remind everybody, our failures.
How we fail.
Absolutely. How we fail. Do it better next time.
I mean, for the record,
but that'll
how much
do
did
it.
you spend? We never actually talked about that. How much did you charge?
Oh,
yourself?
yeah. How much money did you put in the No Yell Challenge?
I only yelled 4 times. I've only yelled 4 times since.
$20?
Yeah, $20. Oh. And it was all to the same kid. All to the same kid. And it was the first one was within 5 minutes or 10 minutes maybe. And from then on, it was just like, I don't want to do that anymore. And not because of the money. It was just like, I had that space.
Yeah.
Good for you. $20, huh?
That's awesome.
I don't know if I could hit that goal.
It's been 4 months.
The dog would kill me on $20.
It's been 4 months.
I owe $600 to the dog.
The dog has an excellent grooming session this month. Anyway, all right, we need to close.
Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Dad Verb Podcast. Check the links in the show notes of the YouTube description and join us on Discord. You can also visit dadverb.com for courses from pregnancy up through year 1 of fatherhood. And as always, thanks for listening. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.